My name is Emma and this channel is all about sewing, mainly hand sewing, although today's video is a little bit different. Today I'm going to show you a different way to do English paper piecing, and I know some people will say, well, it's not English paper piecing if you're not sewing it by hand and if you're not using paper. But whilst there are many of us who would love to spend hours and hours hand sewing, for some people that just isn't possible. Some people have pain in their hands, and there are lots of other reasons too why hand sewing isn't accessible to some people and machine sewing is more accessible. Also, machine sewing does speed the project up, and whilst I'd love to spend hours and hours hand sewing everything, sometimes that isn't always practical. So I'm going to show you what I think is a really cool technique for doing your English paper piecing by machine. What's really great about this technique as well is you can actually stitch all the shapes together and quilt them all with the same stitch. So it completely cuts out the need for any quilting afterwards. And I'm going to show you how today. Also going to share some tips for cutting fabric and working out your measurements and things like that. So let's get started. So there are just a couple of materials that are quite important to this method, and the first one is that you can't use paper for this method because we are going to stitch through the shape itself, and so paper wouldn't work. So you need to find an alternative shape that is designed to be left in. There are a few different ones on the market, but the only one that I've tried and the one that I use all the time is hexiform. So hexiform is a fabric that is designed to be left in. It's made here in the UK by a company called Ashmead Designs, and they're really nice to use. They are soft, but they are rigid enough to hold the shape, perfect for this. I would also recommend glue basting with the Sewline glue pen rather than tacking. I think it will just make the process much easier. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm using 1-inch hexagons and I'm going to lay them out on my cutting mat to just get an idea of the size that I want. So you can see here that I have laid out my design. So this technique is perfect for smaller projects, cushion covers, and this will be a mat to put a plant on. But I have laid my design out, and if I measure it, if I count the squares or use my ruler, I can see that it is 14 inches across and 16 down. So I need to make sure that I use a backing fabric that is much bigger than that. So I'm probably going to cut an 18-inch square piece of backing fabric because I want to have plenty of excess which I can cut back afterwards. In terms of what fabric I want to use a different fabric on every round of the pattern. So I think I'm going to use this lovely strawberry thief print for the centre, then echo it with pink, and then I think I'll do this lovely Betsy, this pink one, and then this Wiltshire berries print. All of these fabrics were kindly gifted to me from Alice Caroline. This is their new bespoke collection. So there's the first one. So the next fabric that I want to use is this one, and from my design 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, I need 12 hexagons. So let me show you how I know how much fabric to cut from my fat quarter. So you can see I want my hexagon in this orientation, not this orientation, and that does make a slight bit of difference. So I position it here on my board and you can see it fits in 2 inches square just about. So I need to add on some seam allowance for when I cut my strip of fabric. So I want at least 1/4 inch on either side. So I need to cut 2.5-inch strips and it will fit nicely onto a 2.5-inch piece. If you imagine that, that gives me enough clearance. That's about 2.5 inches there. So it gives me enough clearance on either side. And then I just need the same with the width as well. So I know a 2.5-inch square will give me enough room to get my hexagons. So I know that I need 12 of them. So if I do that calculation, so because I'm using Liberty, the fat quarters are 27 inches wide and 18 inches long. So I just need to do a little bit of maths to work that out. So if I do 27 divided by 2.5, that will tell me that I can get 10 hexagons out of a strip. Because I've got 18 inches of fabric, I can divide that by 2.5 as well, and that tells me I can get 7 strips out of a piece. So then it's just about looking at how many hexagons you have for each one. So one of the rounds has 18 hexagons, so I know that I can get out of 2 strips. So maths is not that tricky. So laying your design out and working out your measurements is really useful if you've only got a certain amount of fabric, which I have. So by working out that how many 2.5-inch strips I can get out of my piece and how many hexagons out of a strip, I know that I've got enough fabric. So I've transferred my design to a design board. I've removed the hexagons I'm working on now. I've got my strips ready, and all I need to do now is have the wrong side of my fabric facing, and I'm going to position the hexagons onto the fabric just with a dab of glue. And I'm using Hexiform, which has a fuzzy side and a smooth side, and it is the fuzzy side that needs to be placed down. So working in this way, just guessing the amount in between, maximises your fabric because the waste is going to be very little. I can then either do this with a rotary cutter and a turntable mat, which makes it very quick and efficient, but if not, just snip off the excess fabric and then just run a line of glue all around the edge and fold it over, really carefully, being careful not to bend or distort the Hexiform. So I've got a lot of these to do. It's a beautiful day, sun is shining, and I'm going to carry on with this, and then I will see you shortly for the exciting part of stitching them together whilst quilting them at the same time. So that's the leftover little pieces that I had. Pieces like this I will save, and I just had this piece left as well, so that will obviously get used for something else, but the waste I think is not too bad. It's quite minimal. So today's video has very kindly been sponsored by FlexiSpot. So when FlexiSpot reached out and asked if they could send me their Lotus X C6 recliner to try out, I was super excited about this because it looked like such a comfortable chair and perfect for crafters. And I wasn't wrong. It's actually more comfortable than I thought it was going to be. And everyone who has been to the studio has absolutely fallen in love with it and wants to fall asleep in it. So I have the non-electric model in beige. The fabric is lovely and soft, and the cushions are really big and so comfortable. The recliner swivels as well as rocks. And because it has no armrests, it means that it is perfect for crafters because your elbows are not going to be restricted in any way. So great for knitting, crochet and sewing. It also has a handy compartment at the side where you can store your project or a book, and it is so comfortable in recliner mode. When it is fully stretched out, you can really cozy up in this chair. If you'd like to find out more, there is a link in the description box. Thank you so much to FlexiSpot for sponsoring today's video. So now I'm going to take my fabric that I'm backing it with, and I'm not putting a wadding layer on. I think this will just work best just onto the fabric, and the Hexiform is going to add the stability, make it as thick as I need it to be. I'm taking my central hexagon because I'm going to work from the centre out. So this technique works with a design like that. And I'm just using some of the Sew Line glue just to tack it in place, and then I'm going to take the first hexagon that I'm going to join it to and just tack that in place, but be really careful that I am butting them up really close to each other, like so. And then I'm going to go to my sewing machine and sew along this seam. So I've positioned them, they're not overlapping, they're just next to each other. That's really important. Then I'm going to go to my machine and stitch along here. Now, 2 things to note about the sewing machine. You need to think about what thread that you want to use. So I've actually opted for Wonderfill Deco Bob in the bobbin and the top. And all I've got is grey in a small spool like this. The white I would have gone for, but it's far too big to put on the sewing machine, so I've gone for this. It will blend in, it will show up a little bit on my pink hexagons, but it will blend in overall, and especially on the patterned fabrics you won't even see it. However, you might choose to go for a decorative thread, and you could do this with a decorative thread and it'll make more of a feature of the sewing. Now when it comes to what stitch to use, you could use a zigzag, but I like this stitch, which is a bit like a blanket stitch, but it stitches on either side, and I think it makes a really pretty stitch. And it's on my machine, number 38 Quilt. It's going to be different on other machines, but it's a really pretty stitch, and you'll see now as I stitch it out on the machine. I'm working from my design board every time, just taking one hexagon then the next one, moving over to the sewing machine, like I said, working with the quilt stitch. Would recommend a walking foot for this. My machine doesn't have a walking foot, it has a built-in walking foot, so I've got that attached and ready to go. So again, I'm just making sure that they are butted right up to each other, and place the presser foot down, put the needle down and stitch them together. So at this point I've come to the end, so I'm going to lift my presser foot up and I'm going to position my next hexagon in place, lining everything up. So I'm going to spend a bit of time just making sure it's where I want it to be. I could have put a few of them on all at once if I wanted to, but I was worried about them moving, so I want to do them one at a time. But I just need to make sure everything's lined up, and then I'm going to stitch up here. So I'm turning the work just to make sure I'm in the right direction. Press a foot down. Now I've fastened off my thread there, lift up the presser foot and just pull it out so you can see. So far, can you see that's where the stitching is? So it is visible. That's the difference with this type of sewing, that it is a visible way of stitching EPP together. But I'm fine with that, and I'm going to carry on. So now that I have this one to go along, so I'm going to stitch along here and then put the next hexagon in. And I think I'll put the next hexagon in now so that it is ready. So now for the next one, I'm going to stitch along here and then carry on. I won't have to stop and fasten off. I can do this whole bit in one go. Then I'm going to fasten off here, then stitch along here, add the next hexagon, stitch up, fasten off, go back down to here and start again. And that's how I'm going to carry on for the whole thing. So I basically stitch across, stitch up, fasten off, go back down to here, start again, stitch across, stitch up. And if you work in that way, you'll be able to get round the whole thing. So I wonder how long this is going to take me. So here's where we're up to. I've done the first flower. So a few things to note. I tried to keep the central part of the stitch within the seam, and I think that made the stitching look neater. You can see it's just popped out here, but overall I really tried to keep it like this one within the seam, and it just looks a lot better, and I actually like the way it looks, and I think with the decorative thread this would be really nice. Didn't have the right needle to take a thicker thread here at the moment, so that's why, another reason why I've gone with this thread, which just blends in nicely. It doesn't look too grey, it just picks up the colour of the fabric. It's actually really pretty. So I am going to keep going with this. So I'm going to add my next hexagon here, sew along, put the next hexagon in, sew up, fasten off, start again here and sew along here and along here, and just keep working my way in exactly that fashion, and then I will show you what it looks like. So some final thoughts on this technique then. Well, I thought I wasn't going to like it, but I actually really do like it. It's so satisfying to have a nice piece made of hexagons all stitched together, and I'm going to trim it down and add a binding to it, and then it's going to be a mat for the centerpiece for my table. So yeah, I do really like the method. Will this replace EPP for me? No, definitely not. I enjoy hand sewing so much more, so I think I will be sticking to hand sewing where I can, but I will definitely use this technique again. I think for making a bag out of hexagons it would work really well for that. I have a design idea in the works for that, and I think I'll be using this technique. It's brilliant for that. Yeah, and just for when I'm short on time. For tiny pieces, no, definitely not, but for like 1-inch hexagons and bigger, this works really well for that, so yeah, I'm really pleased. I found that I didn't need to glue each hexagon in place as I went around adding them. I just held them in place, didn't need any pins or anything like that. I did wonder whether I was going to get any puckering or whether the piece would curl up, but it hasn't done that at all. It's really, really flat, so I'm really pleased with that. And if we look at the back, I've carried the bobbin threads, so I just need to trim them all back, but you can see it's all quilted in place right through, so everything is ready. All I need to do now is make it into the final piece. So thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments, will you be trying this technique? What do you think about it? And I'll see you really soon with another video. Take care. Bye bye.